everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and there's a technique that we've all employed at one point or another in our own brains, or maybe even out loud. We've certainly seen other people employ it, certainly on Twitter, and it's the if technique. It's the hypothetical technique. It's the counterfactual technique, to use the fancy philosophy term that we'll deal with a little bit more later on. And the technique is one that you employ to point out that what's good for the goose isn't good for the gander, that somebody's being hypocritical, somebody's being inconsistent or false. And to do that, you throw out a hypothetical that demonstrates that hypocrisy. So, for example, somebody might say something like this: if Barack Obama had done that, all of you would have freaked out. Now, I'm, again, not making any political judgments here whatsoever, other than to say, hey, do you recognize that technique? Because we use that one. Well, if Donald Trump had said that, you all would be up in arms. Aha, again, same technique, just maybe this time it's coming from a different perspective. If a lady had said that, if a guy had said that, if a black dude says that, if a white lady says that, if a bald person says that, if a gay person says that, we all know these techniques, and these techniques usually appear and are employed in the place in the Venn diagram where the identity circle overlaps with the ideology circle. That little sliver in between is where the counterfactual, if this, then I bet that would have happened kind of argument manifests. This is not a new thing. Language has allowed for this kind of hypothetical tense or mood since thousands of years ago, dating all the way back to long before the writing of the New Testament. Now, if you're a native English speaker, you might not remember this coming up. Maybe it would only come up in a really advanced English class that I didn't take either. But the first time I had this pointed out to me, this if hypothetical form of language, was in a Spanish class I was taking when I was introduced to the conditional perfect mood or tense. I guess you'd call that a mood? Oh, no, I'm not actually that good at grammar. And in Spanish and English, I suppose, it's the framework of language that says, if this would have happened, then that would have happened. So in Spanish, si lo hubiera sabido, hubiera tomado decisiones diferentes. If I'd known that, I would have made different choices. I don't know. I don't think I translated that exactly right in my head. But decisiones, I would have made different decisions. So the logical thought value of the conditional perfect tense, and this is all going somewhere, I promise, is that it allows us to examine ourselves to consider whether we're really being consistent with our thought or not, and to consider what it would look like if we took this immutable truth we're very sure of and put it in just a slightly different set of circumstances. Is it still really so immutable? And that's fascinating. But part of the fun of the conditional perfect tense is you don't know. Oh, if he'd hit that extra point, then the other team would have gone for two and they would have won. Well, do you really know that, though? Because there's so many variables. And so conditional perfect puts us in a place where you really get into the what if, the speculative, the reimagined history thing, which makes for great conversations over drinks. But again, the fun is you don't know. If I had known better, I would have made different decisions. Well, I say that as a statement of fact, but would I really have made different decisions? I don't know. I can't go back and be in my skin at that moment again with those pressures and those circumstances. If they'd hit that extra point, would they really have gone for two? Would it really have changed the outcome of the game? If Obama had said that, would everybody have actually freaked out? We just don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we're people. We're trapped in the flow of time. And though we can hypothesize about other potential alternative flows of time, we just have the one that we actually know, and it's an enjoyable fantasy and thought exercise to break out of the one we actually know to consider other possible ones, but we can't. But here's the billion-dollar question. What about when God uses the conditional perfect mood or tense? I still don't know which one to call it. That gets crazy, doesn't it? Because the conditional tense is predicated on the immutable fact that we don't actually know what would happen in an alternative flow of time. We only know what actually happened in this one. But does God know what would happen in an alternative flow of time? Well, if there is a God, and God is defined as that being of which no greater being can be conceived, that being that is unlimited in every possible way, has never learned anything, is unbound by time, is unbound by lack of resources or lack of knowledge, that means that God knows everything that is, everything that has been, everything that will be, but also everything that could be and everything that could have been. Meaning nothing can surprise God, meaning that if God says a counterfactual, I think he's probably telling the truth. So for you and me, given our limitations, such a remark is a rhetorical technique. But in Matthew chapter 11, verses 21 through 24, when Jesus twice employs the conditional perfect mood or tense, is it a hypothetical? Is it a rhetorical technique? Or is it a statement of fact from the one being in all of existence who would know it is an actual fact that these hypotheticals would have occurred? Let me read it to you again. Jesus says, "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it'll be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up to the skies? No, you'll go down to the depths. If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you." So backing up this notion that Jesus isn't just throwing out hypotheticals or rhetorical flourishes here, but that he is saying something that is fact, is the reality that he's willing to apply judgment to it. But I tell you, no, it'll be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment. But I tell you, it'll be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment. So what I'm saying is the confidence of his statement of judgment backs up the suggestion I'm throwing out that he isn't just hypothesizing about what these other towns would have done, but that he knows what these other towns would have done. And this is a thin spot in the text, a subtle one, but a thin spot where we get a little bit of look through the human aspect of Jesus to see the divine in play. You remember a while back when chapter 9, when the Pharisees were like, "What? You can't say that your sins are forgiven to that crippled guy because that is a subtle statement of deity." Well, it's kind of the same thing that we're getting right here. The only difference is there aren't Pharisees in the room to give us a cue that this is another subtle statement of deity. But the fact that Jesus would go with hardcore judgment on the heels of what for you and me would just be a hypothetical statement, but for him seems to be something different, that indicates that that possible hypothetical statement is actually a statement of fact. How can this be a statement of fact if the thing didn't happen? Well, again, if we're talking about a deity who is truly unlimited in every way and unbound and knows everything that is, will be, and has been, and could have been, and could be, well, that means that somewhere in the infinite mind of God, every possible thing that could ever happen in this or any conceivable reality has been fully gamed out, and it's always been gamed out. There's no buffer bar. There's no moment in history where a truly infinite being with no limitations had to stop and think, like, wait, what if I don't make Matt go bald? How does that affect everything about the world? Now, he's always known how much better the world would have been if I had a thick, full, lush head of hair, and for whatever reason, he just didn't want to do that version. Every possible thing, grand and small, has been considered. There have been possible realities considered that have nothing, like just an infinite blackness and a fleck of sand floating around in it. I don't know. Anything I can think of, he's already thought of. That's the point. And further, since we know this reality exists, anything that we can think of, he's not only already thought of, but it looks like he's already found it wanting, because he didn't pick that version of reality. He actualized at least this version. I guess it's possible that there are other Into the Spider-Verse versions of reality that an infinite God might be superintending as well. I mean, it could be. I don't know. We don't really get any impression that that is the case from the Bible or from reason, but I can't preclude it either. But what I know for sure is this reality exists, and every version of this reality or very different versions of reality has been thought of by God already, or else God is not God. Is Jesus drawing on this infinitely deep well of knowledge of not only the realized but the possible when he makes these remarks? Well, I think he is. Which means that any pressure that you, me, or anybody who has any version of religion that involves Jesus and the Bible, we are all relieved of any imagined pressure we might feel to go out with the stick of judgment and tell everybody which towns are condemned and who's getting judged and who's not. I don't have the ability to know with certainty whether the conditional perfect tense, whether counterfactuals actually would have worked out the way I hypothesize they would. But God does have that ability, which again demonstrates how different, and because of that differentness, qualified God is to do something that we are not qualified to do, and that is judge. So when we go back to Matthew 7, and Jesus is heading into the home stretch on the Sermon on the Mount, and he says all that stuff about don't judge or you too will be judged. Whatever measure you use, that's a measure that's getting used on you. Don't worry about the speck in the other guy's eye. You worry about the log in your own eye. All of that stuff takes on more clarity in light of this remarkable otherness of God we see subtly on display in Matthew 11 as he makes these pronouncements of woe based on what to you and me would be a hypothetical counterfactual, but based on what to God is not hypothetical at all. He's already run that completely in his brain, and he knows exactly how it played out. As much as anything, the take home for me here is God is very different and very impressive to a degree that I can't even really comprehend. That has implications. I think I'm reasoning through those implications pretty well, but I might not be. So I'm just going to let you think about it. And if you think about that pretty hard, I know you'll come to some very interesting conclusions. See what I did there? I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.